Hello everybody and welcome back to the Fantasy Football Fellows YouTube channel. My name is Cameron Lawrence and today we are talking 5 must-draft wide receivers for the fantasy football season. Last week I talked 5 must-draft running backs and couldn't help myself, so I came back for the wide receivers. And let me just say, we got some real league winners in here, and I hate doing this, but I did save my favorite player maybe in the NFL right now for last, so make sure you stick around for all of it. So we're going to start with Jordan Addison right away, and let me just tell you, this dude is electric. He's a former Blindikoff winner in 2021 during his time at Pitt. In 14 games, he had 100 receptions, 1,600 yards, 18 total touchdowns, transferred to USC in 2022. It was a little disappointing. He did get hurt during week 7 with an ankle injury, so that does factor into it. He also didn't play in their bowl game. But he played 11 games, 59 receptions, almost 900 yards and 8 touchdowns. So it wasn't bad by any means, but it wasn't, what you were hoping for coming off a Blindikoff year. And if you watch the draft, this dude came in with some swagger. He had the pink suit. He was iced out, the white sunglasses on stage, which I just absolutely love to see. I'm not sure if that actually means anything or affects his outcome, but I did think it was a relevant point to bring up. If you saw the aforementioned Vikings-Seahawks game, which you might not have because it didn't start till 10 p.m. Eastern, he had a tremendous catch on the sideline, corralled it, double toe tap, and of course the incompetent ref called it incomplete, even though it was clearly completed, but that is besides the point. But it did get me hot and bothered, like I said earlier. This dude is legit. Obviously, you can't just say off of one play that he's going to be amazing. But it was just another confirmation of what we already know about Jordan Addison coming into this draft. He was my wide receiver 2 coming in. So I am excited to see what he can do in this team. And what really gets me hot and bothered, I keep using it with Jordan Addison, even more than his production, is the situation that he's jumping into. Right? In the beginning of the year, if you followed us, JSN was my rookie wide receiver 1. I really think he's going to be great, but the situation this year is much better for Jordan Addison than it is for JSN. The Minnesota Vikings last season threw the ball 672 times. That was third most in the NFL, only behind Tom Brady and the Bucs and Justin Herbert and the Chargers. The guy that Jordan Addison is filling in for, Adam Thielen, ran the second most routes in the NFL last year, only behind Justin Jefferson. Obviously, we can't just assume that it'll be a true one-to-one switch from Thielen to Addison. KJ Osborne's role will probably expand with the rookie coming in. But let's just put everything we kind of talked about together, and I'm going to show you why he feels like a must-draft right here. Super effective in college. Blindikoff winner. Best wide receiver in the country in 2021. First round draft capital. Doesn't get much better than that. He started to show, and I'm going to use this, I say this very loosely, obviously it was only a couple of drives, but he started to show that it's going to translate. He's stepping into a great opportunity with ample chances, ample opportunities, ample routes to be run. He has a double team must on the other side of the field in Justin Jefferson, who saw about a 30% rate of double teams last season. And he has a coach in Kevin O'Connell whose main focus is to get his players in open space. You add all that together, and let me just say, that is something that gets me excited about Jordan Addison. That's something that makes him a smash pick for me at the wide receiver 37. But he is an unproven rookie. We do have to keep that in mind. That is why his draft price is, farther down. But you're getting him for not much. Same range as like Brandon Cooks. I would definitely take the chance on this upside that he possesses. Like, I do think if everything went right, he could be a top 12 wide receiver. I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's probably be closer to a top 24 wide receiver. But for where you're drafting him, that's amazing value. Smash pick, Jordan Addison. Before I get to the next guy, make sure you turn on those notifications. We are dropping so much content for you guys, and we want to make sure you don't miss it. Shorts, 2 to 3 YouTube videos a week. So make sure you have those notifications on. Make sure you're subscribed below. But the next guy is Diontae Johnson. And I'm going to be honest with you, Diontae Johnson, if you look at his resume, he had a top 20 year except for the touchdowns, which obviously means fantasy points. He wasn't either. He was wide receiver 28 last year. He saw 147 targets. What is crazy about that? He had 0 touchdowns. Do you know how many other people have had 147 targets with 0 touchdowns? The answer is also 0. There's never been a person with over 110 targets to have 0 touchdowns, and Diontae Johnson had 37 more than that. And his bad luck last year, yes, I'm going to call it bad luck, didn't stop there. 3rd worst catch rate in the NFL. And he was also the only wide receiver with over 125 targets to have less than 900 yards. You may not like to hear it, but he was unlucky, and this kind of thing just doesn't happen. What does have me optimistic is he was top 10 in red zone targets. The fact he was top 10 in red zone targets and last in touchdowns, he had 0 touchdowns, is just mind-blowing to me. It is just something that's not going to, I can't emphasize enough how that won't happen again, how that it just is a statistical anomaly. He was second in unrealized air yards, which means Kenny Pickett and Mitch Trubisky threw him the ball a lot. He was moving down the field a lot, or maybe not moving down the field, but they did throw him the ball a lot. And he had the second most unrealized, so second most not caught air yards. And he almost doubled George Pickens' target share. So yeah, you can say, oh, George Pickens is coming along. You know, Kenny Pickett likes him more. He doesn't. Kenny Pickett threw the ball to Diontae Johnson way more than George Pickens. There was only 2 games all of last year where Pickens had more targets than Diontae Johnson. And I just want to say this one more time to just re-emphasize. You don't just put up 140 targets 3 years in a row and then automatically just get phased out because one rookie can make a couple spectacular catches. He will see targets next year. Kenny Pickett can only get better, so the catch rate and touchdowns will improve. He's going to be great for fantasy again. You're going to regret not drafting him where he's going outside the top 30 wide receivers. If he had a different name, he would be drafted higher. That's all I'm going to say. Diontae Johnson has a boring name because it's not something exciting, but if you just looked at the stats and he had a different name attached to it, you would be way more excited. Next player we're going to talk about is Davante Adams. Yes, I understand that he's a wide receiver 8, so a lot of you are like, why are you talking about him? Obviously, we're going to draft him. Some of you are going, I'm not touching him inside the top 10, and the main reason that you're saying that is because of Jimmy G, and all I want to say is that you shouldn't be scared. If I've said it once, I'll say it again. Unless the sky is falling, Davante Adams will be an elite option this season. Obviously, going from Carr to Jimmy G is worrying some people. From an NFL standpoint, Jimmy G and Derek Carr are probably very similar quarterbacks. But from a fantasy perspective, David Carr is a guy who hyper-targets his wide receiver 1, who likes to huck the ball down the field. And Jimmy G just isn't really that guy. But are we really going to act like he didn't just go from Aaron Rodgers to Derek Carr the year before, still finishing as the wide receiver 3? And if we remember last year, he had 15 yards per catch and an 8 out of 12 average depth per target. But that was an anomaly for him. In 2021, which was much closer to his career average, he had 12 yards per catch and an 8 out of 9, which is right in Jimmy G's wheelhouse. Am I saying that we're going to see Aaron Rodgers and Devontae numbers? Absolutely not, right? I don't think we can compare Jimmy G to Aaron Rodgers, even if, Jimmy G can play a similar type game, similar-ish in just from a numerical standpoint. But Davante Adams is insanely good. He is going to finish the wide receiver 8, and he has no competition for targets in this offense. Well, unless you want to count Jacoby Myers and Hunter Renfrow. This is his wide receiver room, and it's not close. And before we move on to the next guy, because I don't need to keep beating a dead horse telling you how good Davante Adams is, I just want to share with you his fantasy points per game over the last 5 years. This is going from 2022 to 2018. 19.7 points per game, 21.5, 25.6, 17.6, and 21.8. His finishes on the year in points per game, 5, 2, 1, 6, 1. There's just nothing else needed. Jimmy G is going to be good enough to keep him top at 8. He still has top 3 upside because he just is that good of a wide receiver, and he's not going to fall to the top 10. You better be drafted Davante Adams. Again, before we jump onto this next guy, I want to emphasize one more time of turning on those notifications, subscribing below so you don't miss any of our content. But the next guy is Jahan Dotson. We've talked about him a ton. He is one of Lucas's favorite guys. I've really grown on him. We're just trying to kind of get Ty to catch up to where we're at. He is the lowest guy on this list at wide receiver 39. Yet, he was the wide receiver 15 15 last season in fantasy points per game from week 13 on after returning from injury. He even started out pretty well. 2 games with 18 plus fantasy points in his first 4. Obviously propped up by touchdowns in those, but still something that you really like to see. He got hurt. He didn't return till week 10, and it took him a little bit to get back, weeks 10 through 12, which for a rookie coming off an injury makes sense. That's something you're going to see. That's something that every rookie will see. Treylon Burks saw it as well. But when he did come back in week 13, like I said, he was the wide receiver 15 in fantasy points per game. He led the Commanders in air yard share, 34.81%, target share, targets per route run, yards per route run. Obviously, I'm not saying he's better than Terry McLaurin. Not saying that. Terry McLaurin is a very underrated wide receiver who is very good at what he does. But Jahan Dotson is good as well and deserves to be in a higher conversation, a higher tier than where he's going right now. Let's look at the splits between Terry and Dotson from weeks 13 to 18. Obviously, it doesn't tell the whole story, but it's something we can look at to try to give us a glimpse of what we could be seeing this season. Yards per reception, Terry 15.3, Dotson 16.4. Air yards, Terry 238, Dotson 233. Yards after catch, Terry 113, Dotson 111. Target share, Terry 23.1%, Dotson 23.8%. Fantasy points per game, Terry 15.5, and Dotson 14.7. These are extremely close. Again, not saying Dotson is the wide receiver 1 in this offense, but what I am saying is that Dotson can play at a similar level to Terry. Now, if you watch the Commanders, obviously you know Sam Howell and Jacoby Brissett are the quarterbacks. Maybe not quite ideal, but we did have a shell of Carson Wentz there last year, so it's not going to be that much worse than what we saw. We saw Brissett be a capable quarterback in Cleveland last season. I think Howell's going to be on a similar level, and if he's not, they're going to put Brissett in the game. So I don't think there's too much to worry about from the quarterback position. I don't think he quite has the same upside as Jordan Addison, who we talked about earlier, but I do think that he can sneak into that wide receiver 24 range. I think that he can be good, especially in this new Eric Bieniemy offense. So he's a guy at wide receiver 39. You're giving up nothing for him. You should be drafting. I teased it at the beginning, but I may as well be the conductor of the Devonta Smith hype train because I am all in on him this season. I'm going to drop a couple of stats for you quick on him, and then we'll start putting him into context. Devonta last year, 9th in receptions. He was first on his own team in receptions. 8th in yards, 13th in targets, had a 27% target share, ran the 17th most routes, and he was top 20 in air yards, deep targets, yards per route run, unrealized air yards, touchdowns, and fantasy points per game. He finishes the wide receiver 9 last year. So what does all this mean? It means he's good at football. All right, we can go home. I'm just kidding. He does mean that he's good at football, but what it shows me is that he was heavily used in this offense, and he is good at getting open, and Jalen Hurts likes to throw him the ball. The biggest knock you're going to see on Devonta Smith, really the only knock you'll see, is that his big stretch came when Dallas Goedert was out, and that is true. From week 10 through the Super Bowl, except for the week they played San Francisco when they did have to throw the ball because Brock Purdy got hurt, he saw at least 8 targets a game. Right? We talk about a great stretch. That is on pace for at least, at minimum, 136 targets over the season. And he had games with 12, with 13 as well mixed in there. Goddard, during that stretch, did miss weeks 11 through 15, a big chunk of that first stretch. But when he came back, Goddard was still playing 100% of snaps, and Devonta Smith was still producing for fantasy. He was still scoring. He still had multiple 100-yard games, still saw at least 8 targets in each of those games, including in the playoffs where it mattered most, proving that this team is not going to shy away from him in big moments. They're going to lean into him. And what I'm realizing more and more, why I'm falling more and more in love with Devonta Smith, is watching him play football, you realize he is maybe the smoothest guy on the field. The knock on him, he's so small, he's never going to be able to get off the line. He gets off the line just fine. He gets open just fine. He is an amazing wide receiver. And I put out a video a couple days ago on my personal page at CamelFFF on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And I said that I am believing more and more that Devonta Smith is going to outscore A.J. Brown this season. And I truly believe that he can do this. He already had more receptions than he did last year, and I'm projecting Devonta Smith to lead this team in targets this season. Devonta's rookie year, he had 14.3 yards per catch, which means that he can improve off of that 12.8. He can grow that a little bit. Meanwhile, A.J. Brown's 17 yards per catch is incredibly difficult to maintain season after season. Last thing that separated them was touchdowns, and touchdowns are an extremely finicky stat, which can go, different directions. If Devonta gets a little more, A.J. Brown comes down a little, they're going to be neck and neck, and I think they could both finish as top 8 wide receivers this season. However, I still do think A.J. Brown scores more touchdowns, and I do have A.J. Brown statted out for more points, but I do think there is definitely a world where Devonta Smith is the leading wide receiver on this team, and I'm viewing this pair more as a Metcalf and Lockett, Diggs and Thielen, where they are more of a 1A, 1B, than a Chase and Higgins or Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, where they're a clear 1 and 2, where the 1 is just so much better, even though the 2 is still a very legit, very good wide receiver. Alrighty, guys, that is all I have for you today. On Monday, Lucas is coming back with the running backs that you should not be drafting. Do not miss out on that. Thank you for joining in, and deuces.